to welcome everyone again to another free gateway series. And my name is Ramon. I'm from the ALA team who help organize this meeting. And I work with ALA and joined by Jimmy, who will be helping with the streaming. So we want to welcome everyone a week before Thanksgiving on another topic event with Gateway. And our goal is always to empower one another and to provide you this free resource that you can use, at your disposal. And this topic, and we're collaborating, or this series, free series, we are collaborating with continued collaboration with NAP and ABL, and it's been complete, I think 14, 15, 16 series by now, and it's going strong. This topic will be on Asian ERG Advocacy Strategy on executive engagement. So basically a topic area of how do you get your executives to get buy-in on advocacy programs with the ERGs. And we are joined by two wonderful speakers. And I want to be able Mable Huang and Linda Akutagawa. I want to be able to introduce them and to highlight their success and their contribution to the community. And so Linda Akutagawa is the president and CEO of LEAP, the Leadership Education for Asian Pacific, an organization she has led for the last 9 years. She's committed to developing Asian and Pacific Islander leaders, and from the classroom to the boardroom, she actively advocates for inclusive pathways for diverse leaders. Ms. Akutagawa is a commissioner of the 2020 California Citizen Redistricting Commission and appointed member of the California Department of Insurance Diversity Task Force. She's also the chair of the Alliance for Board Diversity, board member of Asian Pacific Planning and Policy Council, a co-founding organization of Stop AAPI Hate, a member of the Asian and Asian Institute Advisory Board at the California State University at Los Angeles, and a board member of the Japanese American Community Service. She is nationally recognized speaker, facilitator on leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion, nonprofits, and board governance. Ms. Akutagawa received her Bachelor's of Science in International Business with a minor in economics from California State University at Los Angeles. She has a certificate in nonprofit board consulting through BoardSource. She is married and a fur mom to 2 spoiled rescue dogs and auntie to 11 nephews and nieces. Mable Huang currently serves as Asian at Airbnb ERG Global Chair and is part of the ALA leadership team. In her former role as Airbnb Global Affairs and Strategic Partnership Program Manager, Mable engages in partnerships and communicates work through the company mission to create a world where anyone belongs anywhere. Mable joined Airbnb 5 years ago as a community organizer, piloting the company's first Asian American / Chinese American community outreach effort, leveraging her trilingual language skills, English, Mandarin, and Cantonese, relationship building background, academic study at UCSD, BS double major in international relations and communication, and as well as a year spent abroad as a Fulbrighter studying the Hollywood-China film relationship. And with that being said, I want to pass on the stage to Linda and Mable. Thank you again for joining. And thank you everyone for attending our event.
Well, first off, Ramon, thank you so much for having me and for making sure that you wrangled all of us together and brainstormed with us to pull this topic together. I also want to thank and acknowledge John Falk as well too, in terms of his role leading NAP. I guess one of the things about doing this work for a long time is I've had the pleasure of being able to work with a lot of people, and so John and I also have a long history back, and of course I want to just thank Mable, my partner in crime in this, because I think this all came about through the conversations that we've continued to have. And when we started brainstorming this, I said, we need a case study. And, and so I said, Mable, and she so graciously also volunteered and agreed to be my partner on this as well too. And I just wanted to just, congratulate all of you for your engagement in ALA. I also saw someone's coming in from Seattle, and I guess that's one of the upsides of these video, virtual kinds of gatherings. It enables everybody from everywhere, anywhere to be able to participate. And I will just mention that I'm seeing some familiar names, Joyce Chen, one of them, as well as Susie Willems Girams and Melinda Chu from a long time ago when we were all working together on some of these ERG issues as well too. And so nice to see new people who have come into the space around, really leading your ERGs, BRGs, these organizations that really are trying to and adding value to your companies, and to be advocates also for our community, the Asian and Pacific Islander communities, but also for other communities as well too. So I just wanted to just open up with that and say, again, thank you to all of you. Now, I do want to just very briefly just go through some slides. I think we may have talked about this very briefly, but as you all are on here, I do want to just encourage, I know it says let's be on screen, but I'll be honest, I know it's the end of a long day. You've probably been on a billion Zoom, WebEx, Teams, you name it, meetings. If you want to, this is one thing I'm going to say. I do want you to be engaged. And if you're going to be engaged, please be on screen too, because we do want to see, all of your faces as well too. But if you don't, I understand that if you want to be off, please keep yourself on mute though, while you're on, unless you're speaking. It just keeps the chaos down a little bit. However, I do want to say the chat box is our friend, and please feel free to be engaged using the chat box if you want to ask questions, if you want to make comments, if you want to just uplift anything, feel free to do just that. That would be great. And lastly, as much as this is also being live streamed for anybody and everybody to see, and it's also going to be recorded, I do want to just ask that as much as we can, even for those who are watching the live stream and will be watching the recording too, as we share it out further, let's just try to honor some of the confidentiality of what could be shared. There's a saying, what's learned here leaves here, what's shared here stays here. So, themes, ideas, concepts, feel free, have at it, please share it, use it. That's what we want you to do. But if there's anything that is kind of confidential, I'm going to just ask you, please don't attribute names or anything like that. I think that I think would be just helpful in terms of ensuring that people will be more engaged. The last thing I'm going to also say, which isn't on here too, is that I believe you're going to get as much as you get into it. So the value of this conversation is only going to be as good as your engagement with us. And both Mable and I want you to be engaged with us, again, via the chat or asking questions of us or just wanting to contribute to the conversation. Now, the other thing I'm going to do, and Ramon did ask this at the beginning, but as some new people have joined us, I'm going to just ask you, please, if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat box. Tell us your name, what you do, what your ERG and company name is, and if you are motivated, tell us, why you are interested in hearing this conversation and what you hope to get out of it. Just real briefly, I would not be a good CEO if I did not give a little bit of a plug to the organization that I run, which is LEAP, Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics. Our vision is diverse leaders shaping communities for the benefit of all. Our mission to achieve this mission is to uncap talent that we believe exists within Asian and Pacific Islander communities. I believe that we have leadership, and we want to make sure that we not only advocate for it, but we are giving the tools, the skills, the confidence, and the encouragement for members of our community to step up and help shape communities for the benefit of all. We're a nearly 40-year-old organization, and we have a strategic approach of developing people, informing society, and empowering communities. Now, just so that we're all clear, what we hope that you'll walk away with is one of these outcomes. You know, we want you to be able to take your ERG program development to new heights. We want you to be able to feel comfortable talking to and pitching ideas to your executives. We want you to be able to also build a support network for ERG advocacy work. And that's really amongst this group, the ALA members. And then also, before you present to your proposals or pitch your ideas to your executives, you know, we want to have a conversation about, okay, so what are the kind of things you could expect, and what are the things you could be or you should be prepared for. Now, I'm going to go through this next part fairly quickly because I want to make sure that we have time for Mable to present and also for us to have this conversation. And again, it's a conversation, a discussion. We want you to be a part of it. So feel free to ask lots of questions of us. I just want to start first by just giving like a broad overview, you know, ERGs and ERG leaders, you know, what are the opportunities and challenges for all of you as I see it. And, you know, the work that I do enables me to work with a lot of different companies. LEAP is, even though we are a nonprofit, our work is really rooted across multiple sectors. So the way I like to talk about us is that from the classroom to the boardroom, we are working with Asian and Pacific Islanders across multiple sectors. So we're working and across different life stages. So we're doing work not only in the corporate sector, but also in higher education and also in nonprofit, and with some limited work in with some government agencies. But in the corporate sector, we're doing a lot of work, and a lot of it is really working with those who are early career professionals to mid-career professionals to those who are at senior levels. And that has enabled us. We do a lot of work with ERGs and ERG leaders as a result of it. And one of the things that I'm going to say is that, you know, 2020 and 2021, despite, you know, for all that it's been, I'll just use this technical word, for all that it's been sucky for all of us, for the most part, in some ways, you know, when you think about the pandemic and what it's done, you know, it's been a time of a lot of change. But I think what has happened for us is that it's not only been a time of challenge, but it's been a time of opportunities. There's been an increased momentum within organizations, especially very large organizations, where I feel like people have finally, I think because of what's been happening around the, you know, all the anti-Asian hate, certainly after March, when sadly, you know, 6 members of our community were murdered because they happened to be Asian, and in particular, they were Asian women. I think what it did is it woke a lot of people up to the idea, to the fact that we are a community that is not as monolithic and as much of the model minority that people assumed us to be. And what it did is it started to spur the anti-Asian hate crimes that had been happening since the beginning of the pandemic in February 2020, and it's continued on, and it took almost a year for people to finally wake up, but wake up they did. What it has done is it has created greater interest in supporting our communities, the Pan-Asian community, Asian American, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities across the US. And so what it has done is it has raised the awareness. Now, this is the opportunity, I believe, for ERGs and ERG leaders to leverage that, to really take advantage of it, to really talk about then what are the needs that our communities have, and really to use this as an opportunity to have these conversations that go beyond the stereotypes and the assumptions and the perceptions, and I would say the misperceptions that people might have of our communities. From an general ERG perspective, I would say that, some of the challenges, though, they do exist. And these are challenges that, I think exist for, just all communities. Remote work, has led to, greater burnout. I think that, previously the challenges also, despite what I'm saying, are the opportunities, there are still some holdouts. And I think there still are areas in which we're seeing senior leadership teams, executive leadership teams, still not really understanding what our community's place is in the DEI kind of realm. The assumption that, I know this is going to sound a little rude, but, that we're kind of, the other white meat, I guess, or that we're white adjacent, and yet we have our own issues and we have our own challenges, especially as we have seen from anti-Asian hate. And so, from an ERG perspective and an ERG leadership perspective, I know that despite some places being much more open to and wanting to seek out opportunities to support, I think there are still ERGs, and I want to acknowledge that there are still ERGs out there that are still struggling to get the attention of their leaders, and especially the fact that we have a place in this D&I journey and in this D&I conversation. So I do want to say that, I'm gonna just put this in this context, and context does matter in terms of this conversation around ERGs and ERG leadership, and the way I put it for the purposes of ALA is old economy versus new economy. And I say that because, when I think about old economy companies, it's, like your financial services, they've been around a very long time. They also have ERGs that have been around a very long time. They've been well established. They're very much, part of the DEI work that is going on. And then there's more the new economy companies, like, from what I've seen, many of the ALA companies or members, newer, still evolving. DEI is definitely still evolving in these companies. A lot of technology based companies, especially where ERGs are still new. Some companies, I will say, both, whether it's old economy or new economy, in some cases, there are old economy companies that are still new to ERGs, particularly an Asian ERG company, or Asian ERGs, sorry about that. And then in the new economy, there are also ERGs that have been around for, at least in some cases, a couple decades as well, too. They started early on, and now, there are now again increased momentum and increased opportunities. So within old economy companies, as I said, a little bit more established. New economy companies, sorry about that, food delivery. I think what I am seeing is that there is, even within new economy companies, there was a perspective, I think, and like I said, I think there still is that Asians are not ones that are in need, perhaps not ones in which the companies felt that they needed to focus on as urgently as they did perhaps other employees or other communities. But I think what we're seeing is a recalibration of that. And so it's interesting, and this is where it would be really helpful to hear from all of you. And I want to invite you all, put into the chat box, tell us about if you're working for, more of an old economy company, something that's more established, you know, a large, long time, long standing company versus like, you know, you're working for a company that is maybe fairly new, you know, something that came up in the last maybe 20 years or so or less, and, you know, has grown a lot. But what are you seeing in terms of the experience of your ERGs? Would you say that you're seeing a recalibration? Are you seeing that if anything, your companies are doubling down, or is it just starting out? And I want to just acknowledge that there is a continuum, and that's why I said context does matter. But I wanted to just speak about that. Size of the company also matters a lot. The structure and the hierarchy of the company also matters in terms of a ERG's relationship to the company. You know, the more hierarchical a company is, the more likely that an ERG has to work within the confines and reports in and up through, whether it's a DEI or HR person, you know, and maybe the structures are going to be a lot more formal versus like in other companies, especially where even though fast growing companies, fast moving companies tend probably to then also infuse that in their ERGs as well too, it being a little bit more informal in some ways. But also, you know, what I'm seeing is that more of a move towards trying to have more processes and guardrails in place as well too. So this would also be really interesting. Another thing to also keep in mind in terms of the context that I'm talking about too, besides just, you know, established versus more evolving, executive sponsors. As you think about your executive sponsors, what's their history? Because even though you may have an executive sponsor working for, let's say I saw someone from Twitter on here, I saw some other companies on here as well too, Airbnb, I know Mabel's with Airbnb, Salesforce, you know, it could be that your executive sponsor did not grow up in through the company. They may have come in from another company. Maybe it was one of the old economy companies where it's a more established company, and now they've made the move to one that is much more fluid and fast moving, and so they may be bringing some other ideas that they may be receptive to other things that maybe are not yet really fully understood or known within some of the new economy companies. All right, so let me just go ahead and move on. So I was asked to also talk about what does it mean to be successful ERG leaders. And I put this in the context of 3 areas: strategic, organizational, and tactical. And the reason why I am putting it this way is that I want you all to think about your ERGs almost like mini business units, mini companies. As a successful ERG leader, the same things that your CEO, your COO, and all of their leadership team members are thinking about, that's almost in the same way, the same thing that you would need to think about as ERG leader. So, you know, as an ERG leader, you need somebody who's going to be thinking about the strategic issues, role modeling, succession planning, sustainability, right? If you put all this time and effort into creating your ERG, you don't want to see it just kind of fall apart because there's a leadership change. So part of your role and your role as a team is also to ensure that sustainability and succession planning. Also, your role as a strategic leader is to understand and connect the importance and the value of the ERG and the and one's ERG leadership to both your daily work and also your career. And I think sometimes there's some disconnect between that. But I think if you could be more clear, then it makes it easier for you to also articulate to your bosses, as well as to your executive sponsor, as well as to any potential members that you want to recruit in. Now, just like any good organization, you also need to have somebody who's going to be focused on the operations, right? So you need like a COO, somebody who's going to be focusing on the organizational kinds of internal issues. So having somebody, you know, in terms of a role that would be thinking about how do you build and how do you acknowledge the ERG community, both internally, but also working externally as well too, and setting up those processes and those structures. Your more strategic person who's going to take on that role could be the one that's also going to be building and acknowledging communities outside of the company as well too, because you want to create those partnerships with outside, organizations as well too, community-based organizations, other ERGs. And this person too, the person whose role is to focus on organizations, your role too is to understand and connect the importance and the value of the ERG and ERG leadership to, anybody's daily work and career. And also, when you think about what is the ERG model going to be that works for you within the organization that you're in. And lastly, you need individuals who are also going to be your tactical leaders too. So as you're thinking about that, just like in any company, you need people who are going to be able to carry out the work. And as they're carrying out the work, they're also learning skills, leadership skills that enable them to also then benefit their daily work and also their career as well too. And so, the role of individuals in this kind of leadership role where it's more tactical, this is where they can also talk about, thinking about like, what are the ideas that can really resonate with the members? How do they execute on all of that? What kind of programming would be important to your Asian American and Pacific Islander, Pan-Asian members, as well as also your allies as well too, your non-API members. And it's just important to help them and have them help all of the strategic and organizational leaders also think about, how do you not just do cookie cutter kind of trainings, and also to be mindful and to connect the broad diaspora of our Asian and our Pan-Asian communities. We are not monolithically East Asian. We are not monolithically South Asian. We are not monolithically Southeast Asian. We are very much a highly diverse community of East Asian, Southeast Asian, and South Asians as well too. And then also, this is an opportunity where your tactical folks can also be helping you to identify, what are the other organizations, whether it's nonprofits, it's other ERGs, and bubbling it up to your organizational and strategic leaders within the ERG. And I think this, thinking about this will also enable you to spread out the work and also take advantage and leverage the kind of strengths and skills that one may bring to the organization, but also give opportunities to build those new strengths and skills that maybe are not yet a strength, but could be developed into a strength. Okay, just real quick, I just want to invite you, please keep, please use the chat. I just got two more things that I want to just talk about real quick. Advocacy, part of your role as an ERG is advocacy, and I will say it's not a bad word. Part of your opportunity, especially thinking about the momentum that we have and the way to utilize the kind of interest that I think your leaders have in our community. This is an opportunity to shift from just doing celebrations, what I call what others want us to do, to shifting to now, what do the members need? What do your members need? And what can they benefit from that is not being provided by the company already? This is our advocacy role that the ERG can play. Not that the celebrations are not things that you can't do, but this new, I think, attention that we're getting, this is an opportunity for you to now start thinking about, what do our members need that is not being provided? Maybe it's leadership training. Maybe it's some other kinds of opportunities to be able to build out their careers more. There's a lot of different things. It's also an opportunity for the ERG to also build closer relationships with community partners as well too, if that's something that you want, especially if you need that within your companies. And one of the things that we'll be talking about is, so what does it mean to be advocacy focused? And that's what we'll be talking about next with Mable. Last thing I want to just talk about, and this is, I know, something that you all wanted to have a conversation about, engaging your executives. So I just talked about, okay, so where have we been? What's happening? What are the things that you can do in terms of really building out your leadership? And then what can you do to shift towards really thinking about how do you serve your members and their needs more effectively? So part of it is, yes, engaging your executives. And so, engaging your executives is not just securing resources, but for celebrations, but it is about building and sustaining, the ERG community, being able to provide those for the needs from a career, leadership development perspective, so that your members can also grow and also hopefully pay it forward as they grow in their careers as well too. But it's also an opportunity for you to engage your executives in being your champions as well too, as an ERG. Being able to not only help support and speak about the things that you're doing, but also, again, look to the leadership team, being able to work with the executives to also gain those opportunities to think strategically, that then you could bring those ideas back to your ERG and learning those business acumen skills along the way, so that then you could bring that back into your workplaces and into your daily work, and then creating an opportunity where you're creating succession plans, where then as you learn, then you shift to a place where you're advising, and then others can come in and learn, so that you're continuing that circle of learning as well too. So I'm just touching on this at a high level right now. I want to just turn this over to Mable, because I want to make sure she has time to share. She's going to serve as the case study, because I think this is where we can get more into less the concepts and more into some of the specifics. And I want to encourage you all to ask questions, and I'll be checking the chat as she's speaking. So Mable, take it away.
Thanks, Linda. Wow, that was fantastic and not a surprise. First, I want to thank you to all for all the amazing advocacy work. Speaking of advocacy work that you do with empowering present and future API leaders from LEAD, right? And in the larger community as a whole, as our 2020 California Citizens Redistricting Commissioner. Really great work there. And it's been truly wonderful learning from you and all the soundboarding and partnering with you and Ramon on this Gateway series. So hi, everyone. Good evening. If you are from the Bay, like I am, San Francisco Bay area, it's great to be here. My name is Mable. I am currently, as Ramon had already introed, work for Airbnb. I do global partnerships, and I also serve as our Asians at ERG Global Chair. I was hired 5 years ago by our public policy and communications team as a quote unquote Cantonese speaking community organizer. So kind of with how the name goes, with a heavy focus on outreach to the Asian and Pacific Islander community in San Francisco. And it's been quite the journey from hosting Chinatown merchant walks to support API small businesses, to publishing our first bilingual blog outside of Asia about the best dim sum joints in San Francisco, to landing a partnership with nonprofits as our first API experience on Airbnb. These are some beginning inroads we've made to start building a relationship with the API community at large, and knowing that tasks as such are not one and done deals. To really maintain the relationship, much work ahead is expected, right? But then as I've kind of months go by, years go by, and I've taken more responsibilities within the team, eventually also moving on to other roles, I realized that my work in this space may very well dissolve, unfortunately. And I didn't want this program to end. So that's the reason why I became a lot more involved in our internal employee resource group, Asians at Space. It's been 3 years leading as our global chair in supporting API colleagues. And in addition to that, with the few years working closely with the external API community, right, I think is more than enough time to really notice a gap and challenge that Linda very well articulated in the intro there in regards to the challenges in engaging in DEI work inside and out of Airbnb, especially when it comes to supporting our AAPI members. And something that many of you are probably very well aware of, may relate to too, is that despite large API Asia Pacific Islander workforce numbers at our company's organizations, members in our community are continually feeling unacknowledged, especially during the start of the pandemic last year, if you recall, with the spike in anti-Asian hate crimes, and earlier this year as well. You know, from listening sessions to survey responses to informal, formal ways of communication, one-on-ones with our members, it's clear that even though Airbnb is made up of 44% of our US workforce are API, the sentiment around kind of the support with the community, there's a gap. There's a real gap there. And so also knowing that this is not just unique to Airbnb, right? It reflects a larger struggle within the Asian and Pacific Islander community across industries, sectors, which really requires a lot more understanding about our community and our struggles to really be able to even start solving gaps for, which again, Linda captured very well earlier. And coming from a policy background, right? I saw an opportunity within this challenge at Airbnb and how important it is to organize and advocate for the community in order to move the needle long-term, and realize that Asian ERGs, all of you ERG leaders, we play an important role here to move that needle. And it's beyond organizing festivities and celebrations, as Linda mentioned earlier. So I took what I started at the Airbnb in my beginning, that is organizing the external API community, to internal Airbnb, organizing our colleagues to speak up, share stories, and engage leadership on changes, concrete changes, to really bridge the gaps that we've observed. So starting from ground up, I built out our global leadership team, define our mission, which is to elevate the API voice inside and out of Airbnb. It feeds into our company mission very well of belonging anywhere. Designed our 3 pillars, which includes elevating our stories, elevating our strengths, and elevating our community as a whole. We identified champions, connected with multiple stakeholders across the company to form a support network of API advocates, not just for our community, but for marginalized voices as well. To date, proud to say that we've reached new heights year by year with regards to the first pillar in elevating our community, or in other words, celebrating community. Think API Heritage Month, Lunar New Year, Diwali, right, recently. Our opportunities to celebrate and showcase our culture, promote mutual understanding. With this, previous years, we've put off this thing called Asian Night Market at our very own headquarters, when in-person events were more in, featuring over 30 small business vendors, nonstop live entertainment by API artists, had over 1,000 attendees, which probably, again, would sound horrifying during the pandemic. So we really had to be creative and figure out something fun to do, yet educational. And we've done this through this thing called Asian Trivia Night, which we've done 3 editions now in a row. The first time we actually partnered with Jeremy Lin, Naomi Osaka, Dave Chang, and the Jabberwockies and more on these trivia games. And this, I would say, is very much taking an American concept, right? An American concept and tradition, basically put our spin on it, centered and really centered the narratives of our community. And again, also really emphasizing this too, because this is key, strategically planning it so that it's not simply celebrating. There is a deeper purpose to it, and that's really about promoting learning and understanding about our community and having fun doing so with prizes, right? So that's been really fun. And in terms of our second pillar, in elevating our strengths, or in other words, promoting growth, professional development, something I know and I'm confident Linda is very much an expert in too, because we've had numerous conversations about this, is how we've tapped into API leaders across Airbnb through our own mentorship program that we launched, as well as advocated for more resourcing to fund tailored career advancement workshops for the Asian and Pacific Islander community at Airbnb. And we have been working with an external educator who not only looks like us, right, but also can articulate the API challenges very well, particularly when it comes to growth. On the very topic, going over tips around speaking up, claiming credit, managing up, all of which may be hard to do with our cultural upbringing, but all really important to do if we want to get ahead here. So we've definitely prioritized that within our Asian ERG group in organizing as well. Finally, on elevating our community, that's making an impact on the larger community, social impact initiatives, volunteer efforts are all included in this pillar. Our strongest example to date is our company-wide campaign in response to the tragic Atlanta shootings earlier this year. Our call to stand with the Asian Pacific Islander community resulted in a $500,000 donation to support API nonprofits like Asian Americans Advancing Justice, API Community Fund. We also published internal and external statements across all of our communication channels, which also reached our host community on Airbnb, along with our anti-discrimination resource guide, which is curated by my team, as well as Asians App members. And I want to also say that though it did feel like it just happened overnight, these great announcements, it definitely took a lot more than that. And I would say years of relationships building and staying on message to get there. But nonetheless, we're glad we're here. Not only do we advocate for our own community, API community at large, we also do so for our marginalized counterparts. Last year, during the catalyst of the BLM movement, Asians that organized a company-wide phone bank volunteer effort to demand justice for George Floyd. So that was a really critical, proud moment shared by our community. Now, all of this work is only just the beginning. Sustaining it is the next challenge. But thinking back, really all of this could not have done without engaging really strategically and persistently engaging our executives and really getting their official green light, as hard as it was. I'm glad we're taking the time, Linda, to talk about it and break this down a little bit about executive engagement and our very important advocacy work as community leaders. So really appreciate everyone for tuning into this. And again, encourage everyone to chime in on your experience here as we are going to deep dive into this. I hand it back over to you, Linda, to start this conversation or continue this.
Yeah. Thanks, Mable. And, and just hearing you talk about it, it just, for me, it's just always so amazing because, you really started out from scratch. And I noticed that in the introduction, I think I saw a couple people said that they don't have one, but they're thinking about starting one up too. And I think there's a lot of lessons learned. And I've also seen lots of others who are here that I know have been really immersed in and really working in the space of really, making their ERG stronger and really trying to move it along. Mabel, I want to just kind of jump to a question that you ended on, because, so for everybody, we're going to just engage in a Q&A because Mabel is my case study. And what I want to do is connect some of the things that I mentioned at the very beginning. I want to connect it to what she's doing at Airbnb. And this is where I think it would be really great to get your inputs, and I do want to also acknowledge that, let's see, it was Gil had put that he shared a video, which thank you very much for sharing it. You mentioned that you're responsible for the budget and, for your ERG. And if you're looking for tips on how to get executive oh, you are looking for tips on how to get executive buy-in. So here's a link to your promo video. So thank you for sharing that and speaking up about that. Susie, I know you also contributed that at Wells Fargo when they merged with Wachovia. You know, things did become a lot more restrictive is what she's writing, especially because Wachovia was based in Charlotte, North Carolina versus Wells Fargo was based in San Francisco, and the ERG started there. And so there was definitely a lot of challenges that were happening there in terms of merging the two cultures together. And I recall that at Wells Fargo, having worked with them for a long time too. And then, so Mable, I'm going to ask you a question that kind of touches on what you talked about, but I also want to kind of combine it with the question that Bing has asked in the chat about, you know, how do, you know, drawing those differences. I don't want to call it differences, Bing, but I want to think about it as how can an ERG work with and ensure that South Asian, East Asian, and Southeast Asian members all feel like they belong as well too. Is that fair? You know, to build an alliance together. Mable, I'm going to ask you to start there because I think that's an important part to then what you built at Airbnb, right? In terms of then building and getting that executive buy-in, because you had to bring together a bunch of different people to then go to your executives with your ask. And so could you talk a little bit about that first? I know that's not one of the questions that we had agreed upon.
Absolutely, Linda. Yes, this is a really good question because when I first stepped up to lead, this was a very question that I kept asking myself like night and day. How do we leverage something that is a strength of our community, which is strength in numbers, and be able to affect change in a way that is a collective voice? Because at the end of the day, it is strength in numbers and representation and us all staying consistently on message and sharing our stories and then making that ask for change. This is where we find when it comes to advocating for our communities, this is what's going to get us over the finish line at the end of the day. So in early years, I do recall kind of seeing where Asians was at. For context, we formed more than 5-6 years ago now. Not too long after we formed another group called Daisy's At, which represents South Asian community, and then Chinese At, which represents kind of Chinese American and Chinese immigrant community, also formed. And I saw all of this happening at the same time. I'm just kind of like, oh, this is gonna be tough. You know, like how do we align stakeholders and partner with each other and to help us move the needle, but at the same time, really acknowledge the finer nuances across our different, very diverse cultures. And so the solution that we had come upon in terms of governing Asians At community is really to be as inclusive as possible when it comes to building out our global leadership team. So right now, our global leadership team actually has representation from leaders from what we would call sub ERG groups, for example, Vietnamese At, Chinese At, right? Daisy's At, Korean At, Filipinos At, and so on and so forth. And so we've actually developed smaller employee, I guess, ERG groups, but like informal ERG groups or formal to be a part of the conversation here when it comes to making an impact from Asians At. And in addition to that, we've also made sure that, you know, this is a global team, right? Not only are we inclusive of the very diverse ethnicities under the AP umbrella, that we also include APAC in the conversation. EMEA, we have London office, a very robust London office. We have a Sydney office. So like Australia, Canada, pockets where there are a lot of, there will be API community members in these very locations, right? We want to be able to make sure that our programming is also, you know, accommodating voices outside of Americas. So that's number two. So first, being inclusive of ethnicities under API umbrella in our leadership board, as well as having a global reach. And that one I know is quite the challenge because, you know, that's a lot to learn. It's already a struggle to learn more about what's going on in America and like how APIs are feeling, let alone expanding our global reach. But that's definitely important. And then lastly, in terms of our leadership structure, is that earlier I mentioned about the 3 pillars: elevating our celebrations, and then community, promoting exchange, elevating our strengths, elevating community, larger community social impact. We also have program leads that will own each of these pillars, working in collaboration with our sub ERG leaders in our team, as well as the global leads representing kind of location based, so that we're all working collectively together to really move on the needle when it comes to all things related to Asians and advocating for the well-being of API community inside and out of Airbnb.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think that that was a great explanation. And I'm glad that you also touched on the global part, because that also came up as a question as well too. And, you know, I want to make sure that we get to the question about like the executive ask and how do you make the ask? And I know that you and I have had multiple conversations about this too. So let's talk about, you know, what's an ask that you made of your executives? And I think there are different levels of ask, right? There's the easy asks, and then there's the ones that are just like, okay, how's this going to be received? And so can you talk about maybe that kind of ask? And I also just want to acknowledge to everybody, Mable is an awesome leader, and, you know, leadership is never easy. And as you could see, not only does she have the passion for it, but she has a vision for it. And I think that that is important. But along the way, I think she's also learning a lot of great skills. And, you know, sometimes that's where the hard work, and as I'm going to say, as Asians, I'm going to do a little stereotyping. We're not afraid of hard work. And so Mabel, I just wanted to acknowledge that part. But could you talk about what's that hard ask that you had to make? And could you just kind of briefly summarize it, and let's talk about like, what did you do? And then we could also intersperse what's some other things that could be done for others who are looking to make a hard ask as well too.
100%. Linda, when it comes to making asks to leaders, I want to say the journey at Airbnb, you know, I'm wearing a hat here. I want to say that journey hasn't been smooth sailing, certainly, and it's taken quite a few years again of relationships building across the company with a lot of various stakeholders. I would say there's a little bit of internal politics at play too when it comes to advocacy here. That I won't touch on. And then there's just a lot of factors when it comes to really truly being able to reach leaders so that our voices are heard. At Airbnb specifically, I remember an ask that has been fairly difficult. And this, again, is probably not unique to Airbnb. This is the larger community struggle in the sense that, to what you mentioned, Linda, the DEI space is ever growing, ever changing, right? Evolving as it should. And the understanding of where APIs fit in that framework has also been evolving. And I would say before the series of tragic events this year for our community, you know, the gap in really understanding how to be helpful here for the API community in the DEI framework. That is, there's been quite this disparity, right? And so with that context, thinking back to Airbnb and our leaders, not a surprise, you know, like our very first ask had been simply acknowledging, you know, our community struggles, right? Like that the Asian community, Asian Pacific Islander community, we are still considered marginalized to this day. We are a community of color, you know, we are deserving of the additional resources and attention to really understand the community and figure out what makes sense to support this community. So I remember this ask had started earlier last year when the pandemic hit, and it was clear that you know, starting from with the cases in Chinatown, that the anti-Asian hate crimes was just going to shoot up, as especially when U.S.-China relations worsen as well. The macro level of how things were going is very much informative of how the sentiment and the moral public sentiment around API members here, unfortunately. And because leaders and kind of the larger community for the longest time didn't really fully understand where APIs fit in, it was very hard to be heard, this ask, just simply acknowledging the community. But that obviously did not, we didn't stop there, right? That didn't stop us. We worked hard for the last few years to really bridge that understanding gap, right? And heavily lean on the ALA community too. I think without the ALA community and understanding what other companies are doing, it would have been hard to figure out what makes sense for us too. So over the years, like through the Asian Trivia Night, that was a fun event, but that was a seriously a very much a strategic event to really stay on message that, you know, with trivia night questions that talk about the civil rights movement and how, you know, a member of our community was actually a part of the Black Panther group, and how we've advocated together, and all these great historical and fun facts about our community and cultural icons, and the great accomplishment from the Transcontinental Railroad to, you know, a lot of the work that our community have done to advance Americans, right? Here, all of this was to really stay on message so that we're able to include members who may not really know much about us yet, to invite them to learn more about us. So through trivia night endeavors, through company-wide talks with Hassan Minaj, for example, this year, who share more about promoting belonging through his comedic journey, and through just serious relationships building with API leaders, especially across the company. We launched an advisory council, API Advisory Council, with 12 API leaders representing different functions across Airbnb, who may, because of their more senior ranking, they may have the ear of executives to also be able to help us bridge that understanding gap and reach leaders about our work. So these are some of the ways in which we've, again, tried to be clear with our messaging, be clear with what we stand for and are asking for, whether it's more resources to fund professional development programs, or to support external great nonprofits, and then to build and activate membership across Airbnb, including API leaders who would vouch for us and our mission, and then to supporting our allies, right, our counterparts. I mentioned the phone bank to demand justice for George Floyd. We definitely showed up for other community members in times of need and continue to do so. So it is through this work, consistently engaging in this way, all our stakeholders, members, leaders, anyone who could be an API champion who's interested in learning more to really be able to get to where we are today with, you know, the internal, external statements, acknowledging our community, as simple as it sounds. It takes a lot on the back end. And then also certainly the $500,000 corporate donation was definitely years in the making. Knowing that I started off the team with almost like zero resources to support the community. And then more to come too, more commitments to come too.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I just want to acknowledge that. So one, let me first start by saying, Mabel, what I heard from you in terms of the kind of the hard ask is it wasn't just like you just kind of came in cold. There was a few things that I heard that you all did to help pave the way for the harder ask when the time came. One is you built community with the broad diaspora of the Pan-Asian community, the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities. And I think, being to your question too, I would also add, you know, that is probably going to be one of the more challenging things that you're going to do as an ERG leaders. How do you help ensure that everybody of all the various ethnicities, Asian ethnicities, can feel like they also belong? And I think this is what I mean by being a leader. No matter what, whether you're paid to be a leader at the company by title, or whether you're a leader as a volunteer, and that's probably got to be the harder job than anybody would ever appreciate. So I just want to just say that out loud to all of you, that if you're leading ERGs, you are doing really hard work, because when you're a volunteer, you know, it's not like you could order someone to do something, but at the same time, in some ways, you're learning valuable skills, because nowadays, even for people who are paid and have the formal titles, they can't just order people to do stuff nowadays. They have to lead more by influence. And so the skills that you're learning is really good. And so as you think about like bringing together, you know, your East Asian, Southeast Asian, and South Asian members and different community members, you know, part of it is helping to really understand, and that's where you'll have to lean on your teams to really understand, how do you create a place where they feel like they could belong, where their issues and their needs are centered as much as someone else's needs are centered. So like, if, you know, with anti-Asian hate, a lot of it has focused on East Asian and Southeast Asian communities, but, you know, incidences have also happened against South Asian communities too. So how do you bring in a South Asian voice and create that unification, and then also use that to unify with other communities of color who have felt like they've also been, you know, attacked and in other ways really put upon, especially like the Black community right now, especially after the murder of George Floyd. So that's just an example that I would give you. But Mabel, that's what I heard you talk about, is really bringing together a broad cross section of the community. And I'm glad that you talked about that too, because I think, you know, one of the things, despite I know companies might encourage or have, you know, community or ERGs that focus on different organization, different communities, at the end of the day, I'll be blunt, I think a company really wants more unity because it makes it easier. It's the same thing that I hear from companies who are working in diverse communities. They don't always understand how to work with all the diverse communities, and the smaller the communities get, the more likely they're going to get ignored. So bringing together all of the different communities and creating a unified voice, especially to your leadership, makes it more likely that you'll be able to get the kind of resources that you want, and you could have conversations about how much in terms of resources do you need across all the communities. That was one that I heard from you, Mabel. Secondly, I also heard, and I think what was really important from getting executive attention and buy-in, is also having the ear of those in the middle. So your advisory groups, right? So they may not be members of the ELT or the SLT, but they're the ones that do the direct reports in. And so you're using them as that kind of intermediary step to help create those connections. But I'm also going to say, you know what, the more you can build direct relationships with the executives, the better it will be as well too. And those relationships become really important. And I know the question that is probably next on your mind is, well, how do I do that? Well, part of it is, I think you do use the power of your title as the president of the ERG. You know, I believe most, I'm not going to say definitively that all, but most executives and executive sponsors will give you the time. It may not be quick, but I think part of it depends on how you craft your ask. But if you create an ask where you start to build a relationship, but is also couched in a very specific reason for you to build, to be there, to have that conversation, and then along the way you build that relationship, the better you'll be able to advocate for what your ERG needs, because you need to bring them along with you so that they also understand the value and what the ERG is also doing as well too. And this is, again, these are great skills to build in terms of influencing and creating, you know, just your ability to communicate your ideas more effectively. And then, so Mabel, the other thing that I heard from you is really focusing then on staying focused and being persistent and not giving up as well too. You know, people come, people go, especially leaders. One leader will be in, another one will be out. I would recommend to all of you, as you think about, as you know, people move in and out, the relationship building again is important, but also stay grounded in what you are doing. You know, stay focused on your goals and what you're trying to do, which is to really, you know, be a resource for your team members, for your Asian and Pacific Islander employees, but also for any of the allies, so that they can also be of help to you as well too. One of the things that I was going to just also share with you, I kind of touched on this as well too, is understand, you know, get to know and really understand the history of your executives, and identify, you know, the executives that might be the right people to be your executive sponsors. Maybe in some cases, I know you're assigned somebody, but that doesn't mean that, and I will say, you know, you do need to check with your HR and other regulations and processes that you have to follow. But if you're able to bring in other executives that also support you, they're also great supporters and resources for additional funding, or also perhaps the other, you know, people that could be the ones that could help support the bigger ask as well too. And the reason why I'm saying that is, you know, understand who your executives are. You know, you could look up all kinds of information on their LinkedIn profiles. You could also do searches on them in terms of, you know, especially your more senior level executives. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that sometimes executives come from other companies where they had a really robust ERG kind of culture, and they may have already been an executive sponsor in their previous roles. This is an opportunity for you to, you know, bring them in and get engaged with you here, because they may be new. They may just be thinking, okay, you know, there's already somebody else that's taking care of it. But you know what? If you're able to reel them in, bring them in and get them engaged with you. I'll give you a quick example of somebody at a big retail company. He came from Xerox and he went to Target. Huge champion for the ERGs, because that's what he was at Xerox. And as soon as he got to Target, he did the same thing. He was more proactive. He went and sought out, who are the ERG leaders? What can I do to help support you all? And he actually is pushing them. And so they have a different, you know, kind of good problem in that they have an ERG leader that is, or not an ERG leader, an executive sponsor that is very much invested in what they can do. But look to see, are there others like that within your organization too, that may have come from other companies that have a history of being supportive of ERGs? Enlist them in the work that you're doing, help them understand, because then the ask will be easier to their peers, because they already may understand what it is that you're trying to do. But that's going to require some work on your part as well too. But I think, you know, really building those kind of networks and relationships. And I know you're thinking, I got a day job. That is very true, but that's why I build out that leadership team and explain to people what they're going to get out of it, how they're going to benefit from it. Just remember, your ERG, you're either the CEO, the COO, or the senior leadership team of the ERG, and those hard things that you have to do, those are the same hard things you would do as a senior leader within your companies, but you're learning those skills much earlier. Mabel, I just want to be conscious of time. I know we're at the we're at 6:44. How should we do this? I just want to encourage anybody else, any questions that you all might have. But Mabel, I could definitely ask you more questions. I know, you know, one of the things is what are you proud of? What are you most proud of that you've been able to do at Airbnb that that you'd like to share that could hopefully inspire others too?
Absolutely. I would say simply to get to where we have been today is to build a lot of relationships across members and people who are different from us, and certainly leaders, including leaders, and being a part of a support network, not only at Airbnb with Asians at, as well as with ALA, right? With, you know, being able to learn from other ERGs, and, you know, the Gateway series, I think, is fantastic. Ramon and the team has done a great job with organizing these talks so that we're able to cross-pollinate and take the best practices back into our Asians at ERG, and to our kind of how we got started with this workshop is, and bring our ERGs to up to reach new heights, right? And so I think it's really around kind of looking back and thinking about all the people we've been able to connect with across differences, across the hierarchy, that one's sticky, the tough one. Here, I would say the toughest one here. And inside and out, just creating community, it has been truly a highlight. And so I think at the end of the day, looking back, that would probably would sum up to me as the proudest moment, with all that has been happening in our community and all the work that we've done inside and out. So yeah, I would leave it at that.
Mabel, just real quick, there's two questions here that have come in. One, a question about the advisory council that you created.
Yeah.
How does it connect to, or how's it different from what you're doing within the ERG?
Yeah, so the advisory council is fairly new concept. It is separate. I would say this is considered a separate and fairly informal organization outside of the ERG space, what would traditionally be seen as the ERG space. It is a council made up of fairly senior ranking members of the API community at Airbnb. And so, for example, we have someone from marketing, director in marketing, for example, director in customer support or customer service team, director from payments. These are all examples to be able to, for us to come together and be a soundboard and thought partner to the strategic planning around Asians at how to move the needle on with the Asians at cause. So this is fairly new for us too. We've leaned on fairly informally API leaders across the board. And this year we decided that we might as well launch a more formal council of made up of these leaders, those who have contributed a lot to Asians at, whether it's through elevating our messages in their department channels, communication channel, plugging Asians in their teams, or just hosting our trivia night as a facilitator, moderator, so that we have higher attendance. That's a very specific example. These are all asks we have made to API leaders at Airbnb who are not exactly our executive sponsor or sits in the C-suite, but with their ranking and seniority and influence, play a pretty critical role in helping us raise awareness and promote the cause there. So I hope that's helpful with the council. And I think there's the other question.
Yeah, there's a question on how to start a mentorship program, and I'm wondering if that's something that could be crowdsourced within the ALA group, besides what you're doing, Mabel. And
Yeah.
then on the other question about metrics, I don't know about you, Mabel. I would absolutely say metrics are going to be key. I think the more you can make it data driven, the better you'll have a case to make also to your executive sponsors. You know, I think that's what people are looking for. And in some cases, you'll have to work with, you know, your HR teams. And I know that sometimes that could be challenging because they don't always share that much information. But the more you can create metrics that you can then use to tell a story about what your ERG is doing, then the better you can use that to then make a case for increased funding for other kinds of support. But Mabel, I don't know if you want to talk about the mentorship program. And Ramon, I just want to be conscious that I believe we were supposed to end at 6:45, unless I'm wrong. And so I just want to be conscious and respectful of that too.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we can continue going on. The networking is always optional, but we can continue seeing the engagement and how many questions people have. We want questions to be answered. So again, appreciate it.
Mabel, do you want to talk about the mentoring, or, you know, I would just invite anybody else, you know, what have you all done around mentorship programs? Because I know that that's something that a lot of ERGs have and have started. I'm sure there's a lot of collective wisdom in this group.
I would say my link to get started with the mentorship program, I would connect with API leaders at your organization / company first and foremost. In order for the mentorship program to work, you would need to lean on, you know, more senior members of the community. And then once you have a few, you know, in your kind of support network, then I would suggest working with, you know, your team, right, to really map out the next steps in terms of how that program to look like. Whether it's, you know, thinking about, okay, how do we organize a system where perhaps we, and this is nitty gritty, you know, using Google Forms, for example, to match make our leaders with more junior members, and creating surveys to forums to understand what topics mentees would like mentors to cover, to actually implementing the process. These are some of the things to keep in mind when it comes to organizing the mentorship program, but the logistics of the implementation is less of a challenge than it is to actually connecting with API leaders who are willing and able to do this. So that's what I would recommend as first step.
All right, and I'm seeing some great things coming up in the chat. I see that Regina said that there are some nonprofit mentorship programs also. You know, John, didn't ABL also and NAP also separately, don't you all have mentorship programs as well too? And then Jimmy also put, this is very cool. Jimmy also put that you can also reach out to the other ERG leaders from other companies within ALA. If you join as a member, you could join the Slack workspace and you could connect to 250 plus ERGs. And he also mentioned that PayPal's ERG also created their own mentorship program. I know that Susie from Wells Fargo has left the chat, but I know that Wells Fargo also used to have a really robust mentorship program as well too. And Gil has written that their Atlanta office is starting a sponsorship program. Yes, I've also heard about that as well too, that, you know, some are doing sponsorship programs. And so that is great to hear that that's also happening. And Jimmy also says ALA is 100% free. John, thank you. ALA, ABL, and NAP are great sources for connecting with other leaders. So you can informally connect with other mentors as well too. So yeah, so thank you. Sounds like definitely is a great resource. All right, I just want to make sure that I'm conscious of time. I know we're over the time of the scheduled work panel, but I want to just wrap up what we are talking about here. We've done some of the Q&A. So, you know, I'll just talk about what's next. And I think Mable talked a little bit about this as well too. And I think, you know, I would just encourage you all to really think about what is possible, that this is a very unique time that we're in to really advocate for our communities inside the companies, because of, especially because of what has happened and even still today is still happening with anti-Asian hate. Suni Lee, who is an Olympic gold medalist, spoke about being a victim of a hate crime. She was pepper sprayed and told to go back to her own country in LA of all places. But the same week, there was an elderly man in San Diego that was stabbed and injured in a random attack, or seemingly random attack, but also told to go back to his own country. Same with an incident in New York City. And I know there's been multiple incidences in, you know, the Bay Area as well too. And I think, you know, these incidences of anti-Asian hate continue to happen. And I think it is really incumbent on all of us to remind people and make sure that they just don't think that this is no longer an issue. It is, and if we're not speaking up, then who is? And so I think we need to ask our companies to also, you know, continue to stand with us as well too, and not let us get pushed to the sidelines. You know, ALA, I just want to put that plug in for ALA as well too, that Jimmy said it's 100% free. You know, ALA is here to provide support. It is a great community in which you can all keep your inspiration going and, you know, continue the conversations, share the learnings. And, you know, that to me is the call to action for all of you. Thank you, John. You put in the websites for Asian Leaders Alliance, ABL San Francisco, and NAP. In terms of the resources and the programming that they also have for all of you as well too. And, you know, especially now, because we're doing things so much more virtually, we're not so limited to just the physical locations that we're in. So I just want to encourage you all, you know, please stay connected with each other. Feel free to also connect with me. I'm on LinkedIn as well too. And, you know, if Leap can be a resource to your ERGs, feel free to reach out to me as well too. But I definitely want to uplift what ALA, ABL, and NAP are doing. So thank you all for having me. And thank you, Mable, for this great conversation. I know we can continue to keep talking at length. And for everybody else, thank you for your questions and also really chiming in with your resources as well too. Ramon, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Linda, for helping identify, articulating the bridges and gaps, and Mable for basically showing us the roadmap of how you kind of achieve the pillars that you accomplished for Airbnb. And like you said, it's the conversation has to keep going, and we have to keep having these conversations with our executives and with other people will stop. So now, with this being said, we do have the optional networking session that people can join. I know we're almost out of time, but we can still have one 15-minute networking session if people are interested in joining us. And Mable and Linda, you're also welcome to join as well if you're free. So if that being said, we want to see who is interested, we can just stay, and we'll let people who are unable to make it to drop off.